I sat in the freezing courtroom, my breath visible in the dim light, filtering through the high windows. The wooden bench beneath me was unforgiving, and my hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the suffocating pressure of the moment. Across the room, Camille sat with her legs crossed, her tailored suit pristine, her posture radiating a confidence that made my stomach churn. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the sharp lines of her face, and her eyes flicked toward me briefly, cold and dismissive. This was it. The divorce trial had reached its breaking point, and I could feel the weight of every unspoken word pressing down on me. Her lawyer stood up, a wiry man with a nasal voice that grated on my nerves. He adjusted his glasses and smirked as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, my client has built an empire from the ground up, years of tireless work, vision, and sacrifice. And what has he contributed?" He gestured toward me with a lazy wave of his hand, as if I were an afterthought. "Nothing. Not a single dime, not a single idea. He's been a leech, riding her coattails while she carried the load." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt the heat rise in my chest. Camille's lips twitched into a faint, mocking smile, and something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them paint me as a ghost of my own life. Not anymore. I stood up, my voice shaky at first, but growing steadier as I spoke. "That's not true," I said, locking eyes with the judge. "I've been silent for too long, but I'm not nothing. I've got proof. Proof of everything I've done for her, everything I built that she's taken credit for." The courtroom went quiet, and even Camille's smug expression faltered for a split second. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, years of emails, sketches, contracts, and notes I kept hidden. These are the designs I created, the late nights I spent managing her schedules, the deals I negotiated behind the scenes. Her empire wouldn't exist without me. As I laid out the evidence, my mind drifted back to how it all began. We'd met in our early 20s, two dreamers with nothing but ambition and each other. I remembered the way she'd laugh at my terrible coffee-making skills in our cramped apartment, how we'd stay up all night sketching ideas for a fashion line on napkins and scraps of paper. Back then, it was our dream. I'd been her sounding board, her designer, her everything. But as her career took off, I started fading into the background. She'd take the stage at events, dazzling the crowd, while I stood in the shadows, holding her purse or fixing her mic. People stopped asking my name. They just called me Camille's husband. And the more invisible I became, the more I doubted myself. For years, I'd swallowed that bitterness, managing her life while she soared. I booked her flights, handled her temperamental clients, and even designed the signature patterns that became her brand hallmark, all without a whisper of credit. I told myself it was for us, for our future. But deep down, I was terrified of losing her, so I kept quiet. I started documenting everything in secret, not out of spite, but to remind myself I wasn't worthless. Every late-night email, every sketch I slipped into her presentations, every crisis I smoothed over, it was all there in my private files, a lifeline to my own identity. The breaking point came at our 10th anniversary gala. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes, and I'd spent weeks planning it down to the last detail. I wore a suit I designed myself, hoping she'd notice. Instead, she took the stage, radiant in a gown I'd helped perfect, and turned the crowd with a laugh. "I couldn't have done this without my biggest supporter," she said, pausing for effect. "My husband, who's always there to hold my coat." The room erupted in laughter, and I felt my face burn. She didn't even look at me as I stood there, humiliated, the coat rack in her perfect little story. That night, I decided I was done being her shadow. I started building something of my own, Roar Designs, a small agency I ran under an alias. By day, I still supported Camille, keeping her world spinning. By night, I poured myself into my work, designing logos and branding for startups who couldn't afford the big names. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was mine. I kept it hidden from her, not out of fear, but because I needed something she couldn't touch. And all the while, I watched her flirt with investors, laugh too loudly at their jokes, and come home later and later with excuses that didn't add up. I wasn't blind. I knew she was cheating, had been for years. But I stayed, clinging to the hope that she'd see me again. Back in the courtroom, the legal battle raged on. Camille's lawyer tore into me, calling me a liar, a fraud, a desperate man grasping at straws. He's fabricating this out of spite, he sneered. He's got no proof that holds up. But I stayed calm, my hand steady as I handed over my files to the judge. I'd spent months preparing for this, hiring a lawyer of my own, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman who believed in me when I barely believed in myself. She cross-examined Camille's team with surgical precision, pulling apart their lies and exposing the gaps in their story. When the truth came out, it hit like a tidal wave. The judge flipped through my evidence, her expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. Former colleagues I'd helped, people Camille had long since discarded, testified on my behalf, confirming my designs and my role. Clients from Roar Designs came forward too, praising the work I'd done under my alias. The press caught wind of it, and soon headlines dubbed me the ghost architect of Camille's empire. For the first time in years, people saw me, not as her appendage, but as a man who'd built something real. In the end, the judge's ruling was clear. "It's evident," she said, her voice firm, "that you played a substantial role in the success of your wife's business. The marital assets will be divided accordingly, and Roar Designs is recognized as your independent property." Camille's face twisted in disbelief, but I felt no triumph, just relief. I'd fought for myself, and I'd won. After the trial, I moved into a small house on the edge of the city, a place with big windows and a quiet garden. I reopened Roar Designs under my real name, and word spread fast. Startups flocked to me, drawn by the story of the man who'd risen from the ashes of a broken marriage. I started mentoring young creators too, teaching them the skills I'd honed in silence. For the first time, I felt full, not because of what I'd taken from Camille, but because of what I'd given myself. Months later, I ran into her at a coffee shop. She was alone, her usual entourage nowhere in sight. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a moment, I thought she'd say something cruel. Instead, she just nodded, a tight, awkward gesture. "You look different," she said finally. I smiled, not out of spite, but because I didn't need her anymore, not her approval, not her presence, not her shadow. I replied and walked away. The air felt lighter than it had in years, and as I stepped into the sunlight, I knew I'd found my place, not behind her, but ahead, on my own terms.